This program is sponsored by Willamette University.
Today on Your Voice, Your Vote, Oregon's legislative session may be over, but the Oregon Speaker says she has some unfinished business.
We are going to come back to the transportation issue, whether that be in the special session or in a future regular session.
How she thinks the state can get out of this transportation funding hole. Plus, in June, Portland City Council balanced its budget, but now some state money may not come through.
This is something that affects not just Portland, but every local government across the state.
The city's plan to address a multi-million-dollar deficit due to the transportation funding fallout. Your Voice, Your Vote starts right now.
From Katu and Willamette University, this is Your Voice, Your Vote with Steve Dunn.
Good Sunday morning. Great to have you with us on this Sunday, July 13th. I'm Ray Casway. Steve Dunn has the morning off. In this most recent legislative session, Oregon lawmakers approved record funding for Oregon schools and passed numerous bills to address the state's housing and homeless crises. Democrats couldn't push a multi-billion-dollar transportation funding package, though, over the finish line. Without this money, cities and counties say they're scrambling to fill the gaps. K2's Angelica Thornton spoke with Oregon House Speaker Julie Fahey to get some insight into where lawmakers plan to go from here. Before we show you a portion of that interview, we do want to thank today's sponsor, Willamette University. Now, the interview.
Joining me remotely is Democratic Representative Julie Fahey, Speaker of the Oregon House. She represents District 14, which includes West Eugene and Veneta. Speaker Fahey, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, by the time this airs, the 2025 legislative session will have ended a little over 3 weeks ago. As you know, lawmakers worked for months to pass a transportation funding bill that would have allocated billions of dollars to transportation needs across the state. The legislature adjourned on June 27th without passing that bill, even though Democrats have a supermajority in the House and the Senate. We want to hear your perspective on what went wrong here.
Thanks. It's such a good question. And I do also want to, you talked about the 2025 legislative session ending 3 weeks ago. Transportation package was a major disappointment for sure, but I also want to emphasize all of the work that we did in other areas that were really important to Oregonians. So our education system, we made record investment in our schools and passed a major accountability package to make sure that investment was getting results. Major progress on housing and building more housing in this state. Our behavioral health care system, we reformed our civil commitment law after years of trying and expanded workforce and facilities around the state so people can get the care that they need, and address major cost of living legislation, particularly around utilities. So while transportation was a big disappointment that we couldn't get that across the finish line, I don't want that to overshadow all of the other work that we did in this session on making progress on things that Oregonians really care about.
I do want to get to some of those accomplishments, and it's on my list here, but I want to talk about this transportation bill first because ODOT, even local transportation bureaus, are obviously sounding the alarm. They don't know what they're going to do. Oregonians are worried about how this is going to impact them. So what can you tell us about how this all shook out?
Well, we worked for over a year to develop a package that would solve the problem. So we know that we don't have enough funding in Oregon, both in the short term and in the long term, to maintain our roads and bridges. And that means that, we have unsafe infrastructure. We have bridges that are failing. We have not enough funding to do the road striping and vegetation management and snow and ice clearing that we would like. And we know that when we look at the 7 other Western states to compare ourselves to, Oregon is dead last in terms of how much Oregonians pay into maintaining our roads and bridges. And so we spent a year developing a package that solved that problem. We went around the state and talked to folks in all corners of Oregon. We held work groups leading up into the session, lots of public hearings in process, and we passed something that we think solves the problem and we proposed something that solved the problem both in the near term and in the long term. But it was a big, major, ambitious package, and so we had trouble getting the support to get it across the finish line.
We're already seeing the fallout from the transportation bill's failure to pass. ODOT has initiated almost 500 layoffs at the time of this recording, with 200 more to come next year. What concerns you the most about the impact of these layoffs?
Well, I can tell you in my community in Eugene and Veneta, they are closing 12 maintenance stations all around the state, including one in Veneta. And so what I worry about is Highway 126 from Eugene out to the coast is already a very dangerous road. We have multiple fatalities every year on that highway. And if we have reduced maintenance, reduced striping, reduced clearing of ice and snow, vegetation management, I really worry about the safety impact on my community and my constituents. And that is just one example of roads all around the state. Highway 6 out from the metro area to the coast is a similar level of danger. And so I really worry about the impact on safety, both for motorists and for pedestrians and bicyclists.
After the session ended, Governor Kotek addressed Oregonians where she criticized lawmakers for not coming to an agreement on this transportation bill, saying she expected leadership from both sides. As House Speaker, do you believe she was calling your leadership into question with that remark?
I think we worked very collaboratively with the governor and with stakeholders and with the public for, as I said, for more than a year. And this was a big, ambitious package. We proposed something that met the need, that solved the problem. I think we will come back and look at what are the funding solutions for the short term to make sure that we can make sure that ODOT and cities and counties and transit agencies have what they need in the short term. And we'll have another conversation about the longer term impacts of, reduce reliance on gas tax because there's more electric vehicles on the road. That longer term solution to our funding program will have to wait. But I believe we worked really collaboratively to develop a package that made sense for Oregon.
House Minority Leader Christine Drezen also shared her perspective, of course, on why this transportation bill didn't pass. She felt that Republicans were left out of the process. I want to play a portion of our interview with her to get your reply here.
We had Democrat supermajorities that made a decision to create a process that was really, really built in the basement, where people met in secret rooms and came up with what this proposal would be.
Speaker Fehey, what do you say to that?
Well, as I said, this package was the product of multiple years of work. We went around the state last year and held over a dozen hearings in cities all around the state to hear from the public. What did they want? How much of a priority is this for them to have safe roads and bridges? And then we built, a series of work groups leading up into the session from stakeholders of all, from the truckers to AAA to the cities and counties to the environmental groups and transit groups. What are the things that they wanted to see in this package? And then once we got into session, there were all kinds of hearings and public hearings, getting public input and hearing more about the problem and the potential solutions. And we involved Republicans in that process as well. And the final package had many different aspects that they and more conservative stakeholders have proposed for years, including things around accountability for ODOT. And simplifying how we tax trucks and improving how we tax diesel fuel. So the final package did reflect input from all corners of the state and from both parties.
At the end of the day, can you think of a more difficult time to pass a new tax on Oregonians? I mean, people's budgets are obviously stretched really thin right now.
Well, I would say that we proposed a solution to a problem. And so when I look and see, that we are the lowest of the 7 states, the 7 Western states, in terms of how much we spend on our roads and bridges, that has real world consequences for the safety of Oregonians, for how we maintain our roads and bridges. And we proposed something that would solve that problem.
Yeah.
Affordability is a concern, and it's going to continue to be a concern. And, when we look relatively speaking, what we proposed would have put us at 6th or 7th amongst those 7 states. So we were not moving up to the top, right? We were just increasing our investment a modest amount to make sure that we have safe roads and bridges.
Let's talk about what lawmakers did accomplish. How did you feel walking away from this session? You touched on it a little bit earlier. Is there anything that you were particularly proud of here?
Well, right out of the gate, one of the first major bills that we passed in this session was to protect the funding mechanism for the Oregon Health Plan, which is our Medicaid program here in Oregon. Especially in the face of the federal funding cuts to Medicaid, this is so important. 1 in 3 Oregonians are covered by Medicaid in this state, including half of all children. So we wanted to make sure that folks continue to have Medicaid coverage despite what was coming out of Washington, D.C. Also, for me personally, I'm a former chair of the Housing Committee. Housing is a policy issue that I care about so much. We have to build more housing in this state. And so we passed a number of things that will cut red tape, including putting time limits on permitting and other processes, and expanding innovative ways to construct housing. So, factory-built homes and having pre-approved templates to make building easier. So I think we made good progress on those issues. I would also say for years, the legislature has tried to reform our civil commitment laws. So when someone is a danger to themselves or others, how can we get them the help that they need? This was the session that we were finally able to get that done.
Speaker Fahey, why do you think that Governor Kotek hasn't called a special session yet?
Well, we're only about 2 weeks out from the end of the session, and I think we're planning a path forward. What would it look like to call a special session to make sure cities and counties and ODOT have what they need, versus to wait until the short session in February? We're in the process of developing a plan there in terms of next steps, and I'm sure there'll be more to come soon.
What are your policy priorities moving forward?
Well, I know obviously we are going to come back to the transportation issue, whether that be in a special session or in a future regular session. But honestly, there will be a fair amount of responding to what's happening at the federal level, making sure that we are protecting the basic rights and freedoms of Oregonians. So that work happened in the long session, and I expect that there will be more work to come in protecting the programs and services that Oregonians rely on.
House Speaker, go ahead.
Just say, we in the legislature, we tend to pass things and then move on to the next thing. That is not my approach as Speaker. We need to make sure that the things that we have passed, the legislation that we have worked on, is working. And so we passed this major accountability legislation for schools. I don't want to just move on to the next thing. We need to make sure that that law is working, and to make adjustments if we need to in future sessions.
House Speaker Julie Fahey, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me.